Vice President Joe Biden's surprise visit to Iraq, the most extensive visit to Iraq by a sitting president or vice president since the war began 6 years ago. By the vice president's side on this journey is our chief Washington correspondent and host of This Week, George Stephanopoulos, with a special bottom line this morning from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. And George, Vice President Biden has enormous credibility in Iraq. He's been to the country at least a dozen times in the past few years. But this is a special two-day visit, a long one, and he goes as the president's special envoy.
That's right. Another new assignment for Vice President Biden. The job President Obama has given him is to basically push the parties here in Iraq to reach the kind of political settlement they're going to need to reach in order for U.S. troops to fully withdraw on schedule next year by 2011. Vice President Biden got here last night. He's already met with General Odierno, the commanding general here in Iraq, also with Ambassador Christopher Hill. He's scheduled to meet later in the day with Prime Minister Maliki and other Iraqi politicians. One problem we've had here, Elizabeth, I don't know if you can see a heavy haze here. There have been sandstorms that have actually grounded Vice President Biden right here in Camp Victory in Iraq. So all of his meetings are going to have to come to him. He can't go out into the streets of Baghdad to see them.
And of course, this visit, George, comes just as the transfer of power from U.S. forces to Iraqi forces happens in the Iraqi cities. We have pictures today in morning papers here in the U.S. of Iraqis out enjoying the parks. What do you sense the mood is in Iraq right now?
The vice president said after his first meetings this morning it's a little more optimistic than he expected. The violence isn't quite as bad as people feared in the initial days after this turnover on June 30th. And the vice president believes that there are prospects for a political settlement going forward, but it's going to take an awful lot of work. And nobody is saying that the prospects of more violence have completely gone away.
And the vice president's son, Beau Biden, of course, is in the Delaware National Guard and is currently deployed in Iraq. Will the vice president see him on this visit?
He did see him this morning and brought a big smile to the vice president's face, the chance that he got to see his son, who's still the attorney general. This morning they saw each other for breakfast. And I got the chance to ask the vice president how having his son serving right here in Iraq has changed his view of the situation.
I was involved with Iraq long before my son got here, but since he's gotten here, it makes me realize the kind of sacrifices that the military families are making. And Beau was talking to me last night. He was pointing out the multiple deployments have caused significant divorce rates. There's custody issues. Now, there's all kinds of
human problems.
Yeah, there are real human problems that these deployed forces have.
And the vice president is also going to get a chance to meet with the military here and participate in a special ceremony tomorrow, July 4th. He'll be helping swear in many members of the military as they become citizens.
And finally, George, President Obama next week goes overseas on his own trip to Moscow and to Rome. But it is Iraq's neighbor, Iran, that will be front and center in both those trips.
There's no question about that, Elizabeth. Russia, as you know, has been reluctant to join the United States in calls for tougher sanctions on Iran. The president will be pushing that in his meetings with President Medvedev and also in his meetings with the G8 leaders. It is going to take a coordinated effort to really put the pressure on Iran, and that's a big part of President Obama's trip next week.
All right, George Stephanopoulos live this morning from the American Embassy in Iraq.